Now, for a sort of percussive loop, what I'm going to do after this, I'm going to overlay some sort of more meaty standard drums over the top of this. So this is essentially going to form a sort of backing percussive layer under that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to
Let me just ask you a quick
turn
question.
the
Actually, we've got a question coming in
Sure.
from Weapon X323. He just wants to know: do you EQ and compress as you go, or do you hold off until all the instruments are in place?
I EQ and compress as I go. Generally speaking, when I'm writing a track, I'll have a sort of a standard limiter and mastering setup combinator between the master mixer and the audio output from record. So essentially, when I'm working on a song, what I hear is what will form the final song. It's kind of funny actually because I'm not a mastering engineer by any stretch of the imagination. As far as I'm concerned, my strengths lie more in the mix itself. So what I tend to do is I focus on the mix, because if you've got a decent mix ready, you can't really ruin that by applying a little bit of limiting or a little bit of compression to it. You can't ruin a decent mix by doing that. You can ruin a good mix by brickwalling it to kingdom come, but so what I tend to do is I tend to have a decent mix ready and just use a little bit of limiting, a little bit of compression, and that's what I do. But it's kind of funny because I do sometimes get emails from people saying, wow, I love the mastering of tracks. How do you do it? And ultimately the answer to that is I don't really. I just focus on the mix. So, if ever you're sort of having a problem with a song and you think the problem's down to the mastering, have a look at the mix. That would be my first port of call, would be to have a look at the mix.
That's really good advice.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, up here I haven't used any EQ or compression on anything yet, just because it's a demonstration. But if I was working on this track myself, I'd be using EQ units all over the place. In fact, I'm going to now. I'm going to create a little PEQ just because
That's
I
right.
can, just to roll off the loads a little bit.
This ain't no dress
Also,
rehearsal.
yeah, I do tend to. I do tend to use the PEQ quite a lot, even now. I mean, it came with Reason 1, and I'm used to using it. And people will say, "Why are you using that? The M class EQ is better." Well, again, as far as I'm concerned, if it sounds right, it is right. And for me, sort of making simple cuts and slight gains here and there to individual instruments, the PEQ2 is still a fantastic little device. So yeah, I love it. It deserves some love. Give the PEQ2 some love.
Yeah, totally. Hey, just a quick word out to Semi-Prop. I've got your question. I'm actually going to mark it down here and ask Adam later on. It's a little bit off topic, and I don't want to hurt his creative flow, but we'll get to it.
Okay. Well, what I'm going to do now is just what I was going to do is I'm just going to turn the amp envelope decay down on this Dr. X, so you end up with a more clicky sound. So it sounds like this. Now I'm going to boost the high a little bit. Now, just to add a little bit of movement to that filtered delay, I'm going to take the LFO from this Dr. X. I'm going to take the LFO CV and route that to the filter frequency on the filter delay. So it should sound more like sort of a sweeping effect. So let's have a listen to that. It's kind of a cool little percussive starter. So I'm going to leave that for the time being. And I'm going to create a redrum, which I'm going to use to overlay some more meaty drums over the top. So I'm going to start with loading a decent bass drum from the factory sound bank. I'd just like to point out, I don't tend to use the factory sound bank when I'm writing tracks myself. It's not because I hate the sounds in the factory sound bank. It's just for the purposes of this demonstration, I thought I'd stick with sounds that everyone's familiar with. So I'm going to pick a bass drum. Well, that'll do. Yeah, that's quite a sort of nicely rounded bass drum there. Now to pick a snare drum. Let's go for... Yeah, that'll do. A sort of brush snare sound. And a hat. Just a closed hat. Howdy. Now, what I tend to do when I'm doing a track myself is I will spend hours and hours trying to pick the right bass drum or snare, and then I will spend ages EQing it and compressing each individual channel. I'm not going to do that here because you'd be here for hours, and I wouldn't wish that on anyone. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a track for this redrum, and then I'm just going to write a very simple sort of beat underneath the percussion. So
interesting.
So right. Okay, those hats are a bit boring, but I'm using the same sort of technique I did before, where I'm just using the same length notes and just coming up with a basic beat and then sort of adding to that. So I'm gonna ditch these hi-hats because that's kind of boring. And
Adam, can I ask you a question from the chat? Tonal Access wants to know whether you layer drums in the redrum.
Yeah, I do. For anyone who's curious as to what that means, it basically means if I was using a snare, loading more than one snare, well, having two channels, say, dedicated to a snare. After you've done that, you need to trigger each individual sort of snare channel in the redrum separately, which is a bit of a pain if you've already written a drum line. So one way around that is to flip the redrum round, take the gate out for your original snare channel and just send that to the gate in of the second snare channel. So you can just chain up loads of different layers of snares or whatever you're using. So just for the sake of demonstration, I'll overlay this snare with another, actually with a rim shot. Why not? So now when I press the trigger button on this snare, you should hear the rim shot as well. So it's there. It triggers both channels, though the rim shot's kind of quiet. So it sounds a bit more clicky now. So I'm going to leave that because I kind of like it. So yeah. So here's how it's sounding so far.
So
kind of neat.
That's actually we're starting to groove in 5/4 here, right?
Yeah. So I mean, fingers crossed. If I've done an okay job with the drums, you shouldn't be listening to it and thinking, "Wow, that sounds really weird." Hopefully, it should sound more like, you know, a drum line, but with sort of a more sort of quirky time signature, but not something that jumps out. So here's how it's sounding. That's kind of cool. So we've got a nice little drum beat going. I'm going to cheat slightly here, and I'm going to introduce a combinator of my own making from a little while back. It's I actually posted it to the forums a little while ago. If anyone wants a copy, I can share it. But it's called Delay Glitcher. Basically, what it does is it takes the incoming signal and splits it into 5 distinct channels, each with very sort of quick and differing delays applied to them. So it's almost a comb filtered effect. And it uses a bank of matrices to trigger the feedback and amplitude of each channel. So you end up with some very interesting sort of glitching effects. It's kind of like the poor man's glitcher, basically. But this is what it sounds like in action. It's not something I tend to use a lot of because, again, going back to the musicality aspect of it, I do feel a little bit like I'm cheating, but not in a good way. It's not particularly musical in some respects, but I just thought it would sound cool on this track, and I think it sounds kind of neat. So, but as more of a subtle effect than a sort of in-your-face glitching out effect. So that adds a nice little bit of variation to what's already turning into a quite varied drum beat. I'm probably going to leave the drums alone for now, unless there's anything anyone else wants me to do regarding drums or anything like that. But I'm going to move on to creating a simple bass line using a Thor. So here we go. We've got this Thor sorted out, and I'm going to route that back to the 14.2 mixer. This is the bad thing about using Record as though you're using Reason. You have to route everything manually. Probably because it's not really meant to be used like this, and rightly so. It's just I'm a bit strange like that. So here we've got a nice simple Thor sorted out. Let's turn that down an octave. Let's have a triangle, and then that's a bit nicer. So I'm just turning the amp low pop. So I've got a very simple sort of sub bass going on here now, but that's a bit boring. So let's add another oscillator to the phrase. So I'm routing oscillator 2 to filter 1. Let's have a pulse.
I'm going to throw a plug in here, by the way. If anybody's watching and they would like to be able to do what Adam's doing, which is to build up a Thor patch and a sound sort of just out of the top of his head, James Bernard has done a series of videos as part of his 52 Reason and Record Tips videos. A whole series of videos called Synth School, and he walks you through this from the subtractor to the maelstrom to the Thor, how to understand synthesis concepts and start creating sounds from scratch. So check those out. They're on our YouTube channel, and you too can be like Adam.
I wouldn't wish that on anyone, I'll be honest. But yeah, they are a great series of videos. It's yeah, check them out. I agree. Right. I've just routed LFO2 to control the filter 1 frequency on this Thor, just to give it a bit of extra movement. So now it sounds like. That's kind of neat. I've just realised I'm causing my microphone to shake quite a lot, so I apologise if that's irritating anyone. So
you know, it's interesting actually, because I think it ends up ducking your volume. I don't know if you got a limiter on the mic.
No, I haven't. It's probably just no, I don't know why it's doing that. But I'll just turn the bass down slightly. Yeah. So that's a quite simple. So I've got a quite simple sort of bass patch there, and I've introduced the Thor's chorus effect. I'm not a big fan on using the chorus effect kind of sort of as a really obvious effect, but if you keep the dry wet knob turned closer to dry, and you turn the chorus and the modulation amount up like to quite a high value, then it introduces a nice sort of warm aspect to the overall sound. So I'm going to leave it there and have a simple bass line. So it's just going to be simple block chords for this.
Adam, while you're making the sound, Semi-Prop wants to know,
yep.
Do you tend to make Thor your go-to first synth?
Yeah, I do. I feel like the subtractor these days is woefully affected by me. Not because I think it's a bad synth, but just because I really enjoy using Thor now. At the moment, Kong has kind of become my new Thor, in that when Thor first came out, it was just incredibly overwhelming and really daunting, and I didn't really know where to begin. Whereas I felt kind of the same with Kong, whereas after a while I came to know Thor, and now I use it all the time. It's a fantastic synth, and I just need to spend more time with Kong, basically. But yeah, Kong's great. You've probably noticed already that I've been using just the Dr. X and redrum. Kong hasn't really had a look in. It's not because I don't like Kong. It's just because at the moment I'm more comfortable using redrum and Dr. X. So yeah, I need to use Kong some more.
James Bernard says that Thor loves you too, Adam.